To begin, I want to explain my methods, which are common philosophical methods of moral argument analysis skills. Why am I doing this? Well, because philosophy, ethics is all about arguments. And so the more you know about arguments and what makes them good and bad, the better you'll be able to explain why arguments are bad when they're bad, and the better you'll be able to explain why arguments are good when they're good. I have been teaching philosophy for quite a while, and I tell my students that the questions philosophers or ethicists ask all the time are, why think that, and what do you mean? The why think that is asking for reasons. Somebody says, I think that, we ask why. The other thing that's especially important in ethics is asking, what do you mean? That's because people say a lot of things in talking about ethical issues that the meanings aren't really particularly clear. So philosophers try to listen really carefully to understand exactly what people mean so they can figure out whether what they say is true or not. And of course, they ask that about their own thoughts. What do I mean when I say this? What am I thinking? Is what I'm thinking true or false? Concerning the why I think that question, this really relates to argument. So what are arguments? Arguments are just premises given in support of conclusions. Conclusions supported by premises. So here the conclusions under consideration are basically animal research is wrong, animal research is not wrong, this type of animal research is wrong, this type of animal research is not wrong. Those are some possible conclusions to think about. And the question is, for anything there, well, why think that? Why think it's wrong? Why think it's not wrong? And answers there bring us to arguments. Our answers will appeal to, well, animals are like this, or humans are like this, or animal research is whatever. And to make an argument, we take those claims and see how they may lead to the conclusion. We might need to fill in some blanks to add some assumptions that the argument has. But this is what we really got to do to address arguments about these issues. The other question, what do you mean? I just want to observe that there's a lot of words here that their meanings are not particularly clear. So rights, the idea of rights, persons, equal, important, animals, even what do you mean by animals? Humans, what do you mean by humans? Human, slightly different word. What does it mean for something to be human? So there's a lot of words that we need to think about their meaning. So we have the idea of arguments. The next important idea that we need to have about arguments is just the idea of premises leading to a conclusion. When the premises in an argument lead to a conclusion, it's called logically valid. And this has a special meaning. So there are a lot of patterns of arguments. And here's one of them. It's called a simple syllogism. So here's the argument. Conclusion, Socrates is mortal. Why think that? Because Socrates is a man. Now, this is really simple, but there's this unstated premise to get from that stated premise to the conclusion that all men are mortal. Or if somebody's a man, then they're mortal. Now, when you add this sort of premise, you make the argument logically valid. And this is a premise that's part of the argument, but it often goes unstated. Now, it's really simple to see this premise here, but being able to do this type of thing is very important. Why is that? It's very important to these issues in particular, because people often give arguments on the issue where there are unstated assumptions that need to be stated, and then when we state them, we might see that's not true. Okay, here's two other patterns. One's called modus tollens. Says, well, if you think this, then that would follow, but what follows isn't true, so the first thing isn't true. And then there's modus ponens. If A, then B, A, so B. So a lot of ethics is really just logic, and logic is math with words. So we can apply a logical framework to think about things in productive ways. All right, our next concept is that of a sound argument. And a sound argument is just an argument that's logically valid. The premises lead to the conclusion, and the premises are true or reasonable or justified. Since the idea of an argument being valid and the premises lead to the conclusion means if the premises are true, then the conclusion is true. If the premises are reasonable, then the conclusion is reasonable. When you have a sound argument, you have a reasonable or true or justified conclusion. Let me just mention this. Here's a little formula. When you're thinking about what to do for a practical issue, you need to know the facts of the situation, and you need to combine those facts with moral principles. A moral principle basically says, well, if the facts are this, then you should do that. If the facts are this, you should do something different. And there are empirical issues here. There are moral principles. So there's a lot to learn about arguments. But if you just sort of have this basic idea of completing the reasoning and then thinking about whether the premises are true or not, you can do a lot with that. We are nearing the end of our conceptual background review. The other idea is that of a counterexample. And a counterexample is an exception to a general premise that shows it to be false. So here's another argument. Socrates is a millionaire. Oh, really? Why think that? Well, because Socrates is a man and all men are millionaires. Well, that second premise is false, and you show it to be false with a counterexample. Here's another one. Conclusion. Somebody says it's okay to enslave Jane. Why is that? Well, because Jane has dark skin. The assumption here, of course, is that if somebody has dark skin, then it's morally permissible to enslave her. That is clearly false, and you can show that with counterexamples. Our final concept is that of begging the question. And an argument that begs the question is one where the person assumes what they're trying to prove, so to speak. So they give reasons for some conclusion that only people who already agree with the conclusion would already accept. These were sort of 5 ideas: arguments, valid arguments, sound arguments, counterexamples, begging the question, and these are all really helpful in thinking about these issues. Finally, I want to mention that in thinking about ethics, it's not just a matter of skills or concepts. There are also sort of character traits, virtues that are helpful. So being patient, these are important issues. They take a while to really understand. Understanding, especially understanding the positions of those you might disagree with. Being aware that you might have conflicts of interest in thinking about an issue can be very helpful. Finally, being open to the possibility that you are mistaken about some things and some change is needed is highly possible also. If somebody says from the outset, darn it, I'm certain I'm right about this issue, I couldn't be wrong, ethical discussion isn't going to be very fruitful. So I want to mention that I have a YouTube video that sums up this all, and I think it's available in the course resources. It's also just on YouTube as Moral Arguments Syllogisms that presents many of these basic ideas. Some of these ideas might seem kind of tedious, but they're really helpful if you want to really understand these issues in a deeper way.